Alright, I got that arm cleaned up and put on there. Now I put some oil, some lubricant on this shaft, this arm. I might have should have cleaned it off and just waxed it, I don't know. It's working pretty good. That locks it down there. That can go around like that, in and out like that, and then up and down. I'll loosen this up and down like this. So the next thing to do is to work on the power head. But it's getting late in the day now, and I'm about done for the day, I think. So we'll work on the power head tomorrow. There's going to be quite a bit of cleanup to do on it because it's still got all the sawdust and dirt, the grunge on it and stuff from the guys that used it in the cabinet shop when they had it. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. That's coming along pretty good. Looks like it's going to work pretty nice though, I think. Well, I got that power head all cleaned up and put on there. I looked at the name of that. It's a Co-Matic. I looked it up online to see if I could find a manual for it, and I found the company that sells it, but I think it's the same thing as sold under Powermatic and a bunch of other different brands. But Co-Matic is the company, and the address that's listed on it is in Taiwan. Anyway, I couldn't find a manual for the thing. I just had a thought that maybe Grizzly has one that's the same thing. But anyway, I've got it cleaned up, hooked up there. Everything's on the way it's going to go. The thing I need to do now is to get a plug for it. The motor is 220 volt, so I've got a second 220 outlet over there that's wired up. I've got it for the dust collector. So if I'm going to run the dust collector on this, I'm going to need to make another outlet over there or something. This one only, according to the motor, only uses about 4 amps. Anyway, it's all set up. It's not quite ready to go yet. It's got some grease fittings on the wheels. I cleaned those all up and put new grease in those. And then there are some, I don't know what you'd call those, trunnions, maybe. Anyway, the wheels are spring loaded down, and so there's a pivot in there that it pivots on, and there was grease fittings on those that I greased up too. I cleaned up. I don't think that thing has ever been greased before. I don't know how long the guys that had that used it before we bought it from them, but it doesn't look to me like they'd ever done any maintenance on it. Of course, woodworkers are not machine operators. They don't always lube things and stuff like that. They worry about other things. But anyway, I cleaned those up. Everything looks really good in it. It's got a chain drive there on the other side, and that looks really good. The only thing that's questionable on it is it's got a cap for oil for the gear case in there, and I don't see any kind of a drain or anything for that gear case. That's why I was going to look up Grizzly and see if they had one like it on there. Now it's got multiple speeds on it. It's got a transmission on there in the gear case that you can run 2 different speeds on it, and then it's got 3 or 4 speeds on the switch up there to go to the motor, and it'll go in either direction. It'll go forward or reverse. And then there is a set of gears for it. I found those in with the shaper parts, and I was kind of wondering how those had to do with the shaper, but I can see that those gears go to this machine here. According to the website, it's an 8-speed machine. I was looking at it online, and the list price for it is about $1,300. I think we paid a couple $100 for it, so we got a hell of a bargain on that. There's 3 rubber drive wheels on there. They've got some wear on them, some marks on them and stuff from spinning on wood or something, but they're pretty good shape other than a few marks on a couple of them. Anyway, I'll see if I can't find a plug for that. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, whether I'm going to wire a new outlet into the shop here, into the hangar here for 220 for that thing to run off so I can bring the dust collector down to use it when I get this thing ready to go, or whether I'm just going to let this stuff spew out and just plug that into the 220 that I've got down here. So I kind of got this thing cleaned up and lubed up, and lubing it wasn't too difficult of a thing to figure out for the most part. There are, let's see if I can spin this around here. There are grease fittings or zerts on these wheels right here. These, and they're obviously bearings or something in those, so that's pretty easy to figure out that those need grease. And then these things are spring loaded they're too tough for me to get to come up, but anyway, they're spring loaded. They fit down and put pressure down on the wood when it goes underneath it to feed it through, and there are grease fitting zerks on those. So that was pretty obvious that those needed to be greased. And then here on top of the head there is a port right here. You can't see that, but anyway, there's a port right there that actually says oil on it, and then there's a sticker on here that says every 1,000 hours or 6 months, or 200 hours or 30 days on these, and 1,000 hours or 6 months on the oil on here. So that's pretty obvious that there needed to be oil in that gear case. And then in here, behind this panel, is the drive chains for the wheels. And I put a little bit of gear oil on that, or actually I put some chain lubrication on that. But this, figuring out how to change the oil in that, wasn't obvious because I couldn't find a drain hole on it or anything. Well, this machine has a label on it that says Comatic. And the address where it comes from, which is in Taiwan. So I took that name and punched it into a search engine and looked it up to see if I could find a manual on it, operator's manual or anything like that on it in there. And I did come up with the website, but there wasn't any manuals or anything on it. All it was sales brochures and whatnot. So that kind of stymied me there a little bit. But as I got to looking at this machine, it looks familiar. I've seen pictures and stuff on YouTube and other places with machines that look just like this one. Well, of course, nowadays, all these different machines, table saws, mills, planers, all kinds of different machinery is all made in this pretty much the same factory. Comes from the same place, and just the different sellers, whether it's Delta or Powermatic or Jet or Grizzly or even Harbor Freight, just paint them up in their own color and put their own names and stuff on them. And except for a few cosmetic differences, they're all pretty much the same machines. Well, I got to wondering if maybe the Grizzly website might have some manuals on it that would be appropriate for this machine. One of the things Grizzly does really well is they have real good manuals for their machinery, parts manuals and operator manuals and stuff like that. So I went in last night, did a search on Grizzly, and sure enough, I found this same exact machine on the Grizzly website, and I downloaded a manual for it. Now, of course, the Grizzly machine is painted green, but otherwise it's exactly the same thing. And they give me all the instructions on there on how to lube everything up. It's got the parts manual in it and everything. It tells you how to change the gear ratios on here to get the different speeds out of it. It's got everything on it, and what it says is this oil port right here, you add 80 to 90 weight gear oil in it, just like in a transmission or a differential on an automobile, the same stuff. To change it, you just take the machine and tip it over and dump the oil out of it. Well, that's kind of a crude way to do it, but that looks like what I'm going to do. This thing is set around for a long time. That oil has never been changed. I'm pretty sure of it. So I'll take this thing off of here now, I guess, and I'll go ahead and take that plug out, dump it over and dump the oil out of it, and then we'll have a mess to clean up again, and we'll put fresh oil in the gear case. Now, I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen when I went to town, whether I was going to get one or not, because the last time I went they didn't have the right kind. But there are multiple types of receptacles and plugs for electricity. Some of them are polarized in different ways so that you can't plug things in unless they're specially designed for that one. And I've got, I don't know what it is, a NEMA 35 or something like that, 45 or something like that for the 30 amp and higher circuit for the 220 volt. But then for the lower amperage circuits, like for the dust collector, I've got a smaller plug for that, but it's polarized, set up special, so you can't just plug anything into it. And so this plug is a three-prong plug, and one of them is horizontal, the other one is vertical. Well, that's all fine and dandy, except that there are plugs, some plugs like this one where let's say this one is the left-hand one is vertical and the right-hand one is horizontal. And then there are other ones where the right-hand one is vertical and the left-hand one is horizontal. And then there are some where both of them are horizontal. Well, the outlet that I have for this 20 amp circuit or 15 amp circuit is set up so that I can either use two of them that are horizontal or one of them that's vertical and one of them that's horizontal. But it has to be the right one. And the last time I went in to get a plug, they didn't have the right one. And I wasn't sure which one I needed when I went in there. I mean, you look at them and then when you get there you forget whether it's righty or to lefty. But anyway, they only had one. They didn't have them for both of them. Although they have plugs for the extension cords and for outlets that are either one. Some of them are horizontal on the right and some of them are horizontal on the left. But they only had plugs that were this way. So I wasn't sure which was which there, which I was going to get. I did have a pigtail set up, and I know that's not the right thing to do. It's illegal and all that stuff, but electricity doesn't care. And so when I switched my radial arm saw over to 220 volt, rather than put a new cord and a new plug on it, I just made a pigtail that had a standard receptacle, standard plug on it, and then one of these on the other end so I can plug it in. And that's the only thing I use it on. So I thought maybe I was going to have to use that on this, but it wound up to be the correct one. So anyway, I've got my extension cord set up here. Plug that in. I guess I got to go turn the circuit breaker on for that one too. One time I had my airplane on the floats pulled out at my in-laws' place, my wife's grandmother's place and her uncle's place, and I had it there for the winter, and I was getting ready to get it all going for the summer. I took a vacuum cleaner out there and they had an extension cord out there running down to the lake where I had the airplane pulled up on the bank, and I plugged it in. Boy, that thing went fast and a spark shot out of it. Well, they had a regular extension cord wired up for 220 out there. I didn't know it till after the spark started flying. So anyway, this is plugged in. The extension cord is plugged into the outlet over there on the bench, and I just turned the circuit breaker on. So let's see what we got going here now. There's a 2-speed switch here, and it's bidirectional. So I guess it's 2 speeds forwards and 2 speeds reverse. So, and that doesn't work. The motor is buzzing, but it's not coming on. Motor's froze up for some reason. Oh, I've got a switch back here. Maybe that's it. I don't know. There we go. Let's see what happens now. No, motor's still not turning. Okay, well, now we know that, so we've got to work on the motor a little bit and see what I can do with that. Meanwhile, we decided it's time to start thinning down some of the stable here. There's some stuff here now that I know I'm never going to use. We got this little Hobart 140 handler. Hobart handler 140 wire feed welder. That's been under the bench for quite a while. Bought that from a neighbor that was moving out of town. I give it to my granddaughter when she was taking shop class and welding class, and she never did use it, so I brought it back, and it's just been sitting here for years, so might as well let somebody else get some use out of that. And then several years ago I bought 2 of these Harbor Freight benchtop sandblast cabinets with the idea that I could put walnut shells in one of them and glass beads in the other, and then that way stuff that I didn't want to take into the big sandblaster that's kind of harsh for it, say if I wanted to clean some pistons off or something like that, I could put them in one of these cabinets with walnut shells or something like that in them. I've never have used them. They've sat here for several years now, so again, you might as well let somebody else get some use out of those. Well, I got the motor kind of going, My first instinct when something like that doesn't work is to figure out what I screwed up. I went and got a multimeter and checked and made sure I had current running through the extension cord out here and the proper current, and both legs are hot. So I went ahead and pulled the cover off of here and plugged it back in and turned it on. And by turning it on, and if I just give it a little flip there, then that'll start the motor turning and running. And you can see the wheels are turning here. So the wheels go round and around. Let that run for a little bit. I think it's probably just froze up from sitting too long. Probably the bearings are crudded up a little bit in there or something. That's what we'll do, is just go ahead and let it run a little bit. Now I can flip that off and turn it over the other way and run the reverse direction, and it runs that way too. So I'm just going to let it run at high speed for a while, in a high speed setting for a while, and see if I can get that motor broke in, get it loosened up to where it'll work. Alright, to eliminate another variable, I just took the cover off of this switch and took my multimeter and ohmed out the cord. Well, this is the cord. I just made up the end on it, put the plug on the end of it, and I just ohmed it out to make sure that I was making good connection, that I didn't miss hooking something up in there, and that it was making proper connection in here. And it is. So I will put this thing back together. Well, the motor still, it runs nice and smooth on the high speed. When I turn it on, it won't start by itself. Start capacitor has juice in it, so that's not what the problem is. The only thing I can think of is just to let it run for a while without tearing it apart. I don't want to tear it apart if I don't have to, tear the motor apart if I don't have to, but I'm capable of doing it and getting it back together again. But we'll let it run and see if that loosens it up inside enough that it'll start on its own. Well, this thing is running. I'm going to leave it running for a while, but I might as well try it out. So this is pretty cool. Well, now I guess I need to set the shaper up. So what I've got is I've got the spindle in here right now. That's the one I used for doing the 4x6s that I made for the fish sticks. And then we've got these two spindles. These came with a machine. I think this one's a 1/2 inch. The one that's in there is a 3/4 inch. And this one is a 1 inch. What I've got here is this 3-inch planing molder head. Well, that won't fit on the spindles that came with the machine. So I've got a 4-inch spindle for that to fit on. And then we've got a router, an adapter here for a router bit, to use a 1/2 inch router bits in there too. Well, anyway, this is what we're going to use. And I've got the knife blades here for the tongue and groove. That's for the groove, and it's going to have a V on it for a panel bit. So that'll go in here. Well, I didn't need the 3-inch molder head for these knife blades here, but you need it for these molding blades that I've got in here. I've got some of these for that too. Well, I could have had a 2-inch molder head for this, and then I could have used it on the regular spindle, but I didn't want to buy 2 of them. So if I buy a 3-inch, it'll work for the 2-inch molders heads. I thought about buying another one of these molder heads so I could just set up one set of knives in one and the other set of knives in the other one, and just swap the whole molder heads. But these things are 75 bucks a piece now, and I didn't want to spend the money on it. I have to figure out which one I'm going to cut first, whether I'm going to cut the tongue first or the groove first. Well, these knife blades have serrations on them, and then this molder head has serrations on one side of that, so these things lock in there. And then there's a gib that fits in there that tightens down on them and tightens them in there. So that's what we'll have to do now, is to go ahead and take this spindle out of there and put this long spindle in there, set up this molder head with the knives. I'll put the guard back on there and get it bolted down, and then I've got to set up a fence for it. Okay, there's the first one all set up, the first set of knives, and that's the first one I'm going to use. That'll make the tongue, or that'll make the groove in the boards. I'm getting this thing set up. I got the guard on back there. I had to move it forward. There's two sets of holes in the guard, and I had it on the back set, and that was too far away for this fence. So the fence is still too far back. It's got to come back a little ways yet for these locking bolts, these adjusting bolts that lock it this back and forth this way to fit in the holes that's drilled for those. And you can see that is hitting that fence pretty good right there. So what I'm going to do is there's bolts on these fences, on the wood on the fences, that I can loosen up, and I can slide the fences out, which will leave a humongous gap in there. But I'm still going to get another board to put on there to put another fence on there, and a taller fence and stuff on there. Maybe I've got some UHMW, I might even get that to put on there, I don't know. But for right now, this is what we got here. Of course, this is thicker than the pieces, but this will, see, that's just bare. That thing is already touching there, and it's hitting that fence. So I need to get another wrench to loosen up those nuts on the fence to move it out. And I want to get a piece that fits the full length of this, full width across here, and maybe even past the tabletop for a fence there to work. Anyway, it's getting set up. And then I want to get something to make to go over the top of this for a guard on that, so that all the sawdust and stuff goes back, all the chips goes back out that way. I took the adapter for the dust collector off. Anyway, that thing just collects chips and stuff anyway when you're running it through there. So, and the motor, I've been running it for a half hour, something like that, and it still is too tight to start on its own. I don't know, maybe it needs a new start capacitor, I don't know. We'll let it run a little bit, see if it loosens up. I may have to take it all apart. Contacts in there for the starter probably corroded up, need to be cleaned up, burnished up, and brightened up and stuff. They probably got corrosion on them. Anyway, I should be able to get this thing operating tomorrow. It's pretty much set up now. But I think that's about it for today. Wife said dinner's warmed up, so better go in and get some dinner.